They said the operating room was off limits. They said she didn't have the authority. They said a young doctor had no place near a wounded Navy SEAL whose life hung by a thread. Outside the sealed doors, alarms pulsed like a countdown. Inside, hesitation was killing a man faster than blood loss ever could. The hospital air felt heavy, thick with ego, fear, and the unspoken rule that rank mattered more than skill. A stretcher waited. Time slipped away, and a woman in scrubs stood frozen in the hallway, blocked by people who never bothered to ask what she was truly capable of. Then the doors burst open. Boots hit the floor. A uniform filled the corridor. And one thunderous voice shattered the silence with a command that flipped power on its head. She's in charge now. In that moment, everything changed. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you enjoy intense, true-to-life stories of courage, justice, and unexpected heroes, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The helicopter blades carved the night air into violent spirals as the Black Hawk descended onto the hospital's rooftop helipad. Wind slammed against the concrete, scattering loose debris and forcing ground staff to shield their faces. Red warning lights pulsed, bathing everything in a harsh, urgent glow. This was not a routine medevac. Everyone present could feel it. Inside the aircraft lay Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reeves, a Navy SEAL with over a decade of classified deployments etched into his battered body. Now those years had caught up with him in a single catastrophic moment. Shrapnel wounds riddled his abdomen and chest. His blood pressure was crashing. Oxygen saturation flickered like a dying signal. Every second mattered. Move, move. A flight medic shouted as the stretcher was unlocked. The trauma team was already waiting as the helicopter doors flew open. Nurses rushed forward, hands steady despite the chaos, transferring Reeves onto a gurney in one seamless motion. Someone called out vitals. Another squeezed IV bags. The gurney wheels screamed as they raced toward the elevator. Down below, Street Matthews Regional Medical Center snapped into emergency protocol. This was a civilian hospital, but it sat less than 30 miles from a major military installation. They had trained for this. Still, when a SEAL came through the doors, the atmosphere changed. Voices lowered. Movements sharpened. Every decision suddenly felt heavier. Trauma. One is prepped. A nurse called as the elevator doors slid open. The gurney burst into the emergency bay, monitors beeping erratically. Blood soaked through the sheets despite pressure bandages. Doctor. Richard Halston, the hospital's senior trauma surgeon, stepped forward, already gloved, already certain this case belonged to him. Gunshot, he asked briskly. IED fragmentation, the medic replied. Multiple internal injuries suspected. He's unstable. Halston nodded once. Or, now. From the edge of the room, a woman watched. Doctor. Evelyn Carter stood still, her hands folded loosely at her waist, eyes tracking every movement with quiet intensity. She looked younger than most of the attending physicians, early 30s at most. No flashy confidence. No raised voice. Just focus. She stepped forward. I need to be in that operating room. The words were calm, measured, almost gentle, but they cut through the noise. Halston turned surprised. His gaze flicked over her badge, then her face. His jaw tightened. No, he said flatly. This is my case. Evelyn didn't argue. He has complex vascular trauma. If the shrapnel migrated, I said no, Halston snapped louder now. This isn't the time. Around them, nurses exchanged quick glances. One of the residents pretended not to hear. The gurney was already moving again, pushing past Evelyn toward the double doors leading to surgery. She followed. Dr. Halston, she said, matching his pace. His injury pattern suggests retroperitoneal bleeding. If you go in blind, Halston stopped so abruptly the gurney nearly clipped his heel. He turned on her fully now. Dr. Carter, he said, voice tight with irritation. You are not listed as the attending surgeon on this case. You're not even on the trauma call rotation tonight. I know, Evelyn replied, but I've handled this exact profile before. Halston let out a short, humorless laugh. This isn't a seminar. This is a live OR, with a Tier 1 operator bleeding out. We don't have room for guesses. Her eyes didn't waver. They're not guesses. That was when Halston noticed the faint tension in the room, the way a few nurses had slowed listening. He didn't like it. "Step back," he ordered. "Now." Security doors slid open ahead of them, revealing the sterile white corridor leading to the operating suites. Halston gestured sharply to a charge nurse. "Do not let anyone else through." The nurse hesitated, eyes flicking to Evelyn, then back to Halston. "Doctor, that's an order." The doors closed with a soft hiss, sealing Evelyn out. She stood there as the lock indicator turned red. Inside the OR, Halston scrubbed in irritation, simmering beneath his practiced calm. He hated interruptions. He hated uncertainty even more. And he hated being challenged, especially by someone who looked barely old enough to have finished residency. Outside, Evelyn remained motionless. A nurse approached quietly. "Dr. Carter, are you okay?" Evelyn exhaled slowly. "How long until they induce?" 2 minutes, the nurse said. "Maybe less." Evelyn nodded once. "If his pressure drops below 80 systolic before they clamp, he won't make it." The nurse swallowed. "Should I tell someone?" Evelyn looked at the red light on the door, then down at her hands. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Not fear, but frustration held tightly in check. "I've said what I can," she replied. Minutes passed like hours. Inside the OR, alarms began to escalate. Blood pooled faster than suction could clear it. Halston's jaw clenched as he worked, hands moving with expert speed, but the bleeding source refused to reveal itself. Pressures dropping, an anesthesiologist warned. 75 and falling. "Find the bleed," Halston snapped. Outside, Evelyn felt it before anyone told her. She glanced up as the tone of the alarms shifted sharper, now more desperate. A hospital administrator hurried down the corridor, phone pressed to his ear, face pale. "Yes, sir. He's in surgery now. Complications." Evelyn turned toward him. "Who are you speaking to?" The administrator barely looked at her. "Pentagon liaison." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Down the hall, heavy footsteps echoed, boots, not dress shoes. A pair of uniformed military escorts appeared at the far end, scanning the area with purpose. Evelyn straightened. The red light above the operating room door continued to glow. And inside, the SEAL's heart rate dipped dangerously low. Inside operating room 3, the temperature felt 10 degrees colder than the rest of the hospital. Not because the thermostat had changed, but because tension had. Dr. Richard Halston stood over the open surgical field, his hands moving with mechanical precision. Years of experience guided every motion. Clamp, suction, retract. He was good, exceptionally good. No one denied that. Yet, something about this case refused to fall into line. "BP's at 70, the anesthesiologist called out. "Heart rate 140 and climbing. Give fluids," Halston ordered, without looking up. Another unit of O negative. A nurse passed instruments. Blood slicked the gloves faster than it could be cleared. Halston's eyes narrowed as he traced the wound track. "Where is it?" he muttered. The shrapnel had entered at an odd angle, tearing through tissue in a chaotic path. It wasn't behaving like a textbook injury. Every time Halston thought he'd isolated the source, the bleeding surged from somewhere else, deeper hidden. Outside the OR doctor, Evelyn Carter stood just beyond the sealed doors, arms at her sides, posture straight but tense. She listened not with her ears but with instinct. The cadence of alarms, the hurried footsteps, the subtle shifts that only someone who had lived inside operating rooms for years could read. A young resident approached her hesitantly. "Dr. Carter, they're saying it's worse than expected." Evelyn didn't turn. "Yes," the resident swallowed. "Dr. Halston thinks the fragment migrated." Evelyn finally looked at him. "I know." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with urgency. "If it's lodged near the inferior vena cava and they don't control proximal flow first." She stopped herself. It didn't matter. She wasn't inside. "Across the corridor, Doctor." Halston's authority was unquestioned. Nurses followed his commands instantly. Residents scribbled notes, eyes darting nervously between monitors and incision, but cracks were forming. "Doctor," the scrub nurse said quietly, "we're losing suction visibility." Halston exhaled sharply. "Increase suction. Widen the field." That could destabilize him further, the anesthesiologist warned. Halston shot him a look. "Unless you'd like to take over the surgery," silence followed. Halston hated that silence almost as much as he hated the doubt creeping into his own chest. He glanced at the monitor again. 68 systolic. Damn it. He adjusted his approach, fingers probing deeper. And then a sudden rush of blood. There, he snapped. Clamp now. The clamp went in. For a heartbeat, it seemed to work. Then the pressure plummeted. 55, the anesthesiologist said, voice tight. He's crashing. Outside, Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. This was the moment. She stepped forward and pressed the intercom button beside the OR doors. The line crackled. "This is Dr. Carter," she said evenly. "You're clamping distal without proximal control. You're aggravating the bleed." Halston froze. Slowly, deliberately, he turned toward the speaker. "What did you say?" he demanded. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. "The fragment likely migrated medially. You need proximal vascular control before you touch it again." Halston stared at the door, as if she were standing in front of him. "You are not in this OR," he said coldly, "and you are dangerously out of line. If you continue like this," Evelyn replied, "he will arrest in under 2 minutes." A nurse glanced at Halston. "Doctor, BP's 48. Halston slammed his palm against the table. "Enough." He turned back to the patient. "Prep for internal compression." The anesthesiologist hesitated. "Richard," I said, "do it." Outside, the hospital administrator returned breathless. "Dr. Carter, there's a call for you." Evelyn turned. "From who?" The man swallowed. "A military liaison. Very high priority." She took the phone. "Yes," she said simply. A pause. Her expression didn't change, but the muscles along her jaw tightened. "I understand," she replied. "He's unstable now." Another pause. "Yes, I'm aware they blocked my access." She listened, then quietly, "No, sir, I haven't disclosed anything." Her gaze flicked to the OR doors. "I'll wait." She handed the phone back. Inside the operating room, chaos edged closer to breaking point. Heart rate dropping, the anesthesiologist called, "We're losing him." Halston's hands moved faster now, not with confidence, but with urgency bordering on desperation. Blood obscured the field again. "Where is it?" he growled. The resident assisting him hesitated, then spoke up. "Doctor, what if Dr. Carter was right?" Halston's head snapped up. "Excuse me, I mean the injury pattern. Maybe proximal control first." Halston leaned in, close voice, low and lethal. "You will not question my judgment in my OR." The resident went silent, face pale. But the doubt had been spoken aloud, and it lingered. Outside, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor again, closer this time. 2 uniformed officers moved with purpose, clearing the hallway. Nurses pressed themselves against the walls. Evelyn straightened instinctively. Then she saw him. A tall figure in dress uniform entered the surgical wing, his presence commanding immediate silence. His hair was steel gray, his posture rigid with authority earned over decades. The insignia on his chest gleamed under fluorescent lights. A general. Hospital staff froze. The administrator rushed forward. "Sir, this area is restricted." The general raised a hand. "I know exactly where I am." His eyes scanned the corridor, sharp and searching. They landed on Evelyn. He studied her for a long moment, long enough for the air to feel heavy, expectant. Then he asked one question. "Why isn't she in that operating room?" Behind the sealed doors, the SEAL's monitor let out a long, shrill warning tone. The general's question hung in the corridor like a live wire. No one answered at first. The hospital administrator cleared his throat, hands trembling slightly. "Sir Doctor, Halston is the attending trauma surgeon on record." He determined. "That wasn't my question," the general interrupted calmly. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Authority lived in the stillness around it. "I asked," he continued, eyes never leaving Evelyn, "why she isn't in that operating room." Evelyn met his gaze but said nothing. She had learned long ago that timing mattered more than volume. A charge nurse spoke up, hesitant but honest. "Sir, there was a disagreement about credentials. Doctor, Carter isn't on the trauma rotation tonight." The general nodded slowly, absorbing the words. "And yet he said I was told she was specifically requested." The administrator stiffened. "Requested by whom, sir? By people whose lives depend on outcomes, not titles." Inside, the OR alarm screamed. "BP's 40, the anesthesiologist shouted. "We're losing cardiac output, doctor." Halston felt sweat bead beneath his cap. His hands worked furiously now, suction roaring as blood clouded the field. He had seen chaos before, combat injuries, mass casualties, but this felt different. This felt like time slipping through his fingers. "Give epi," he ordered. Now the anesthesiologist complied. The monitor fluttered, then dipped again. "Not responding," she said. "He's circling the drain." Halston clenched his jaw. He refused to look at the door, refused to think about the voice on the intercom, refused to imagine he might be wrong. Outside, Evelyn finally spoke. "Sir," she said quietly to the general, "with respect, we're running out of minutes." The general turned fully toward her. "Explain." "The fragment likely lodged near the inferior vena cava," Evelyn said. "The bleeding pattern suggests retroperitoneal migration. If they don't gain proximal control first, every clamp will worsen the tear." A beat. The general didn't ask her how she knew. How long, he asked instead. 60 to 90 seconds before cardiac arrest, she replied. The general nodded once. Then he turned to the administrator. "Open that door." The administrator paled. "Sir, hospital protocol." The general stepped closer. "This patient is a United States Navy SEAL on an active duty operation. Protocol answers to survival." Security hesitated, then moved. The red indicator above the OR door flickered. Inside, Halston heard the click. He looked up just as the doors slid open. "What the hell is going on?" he snapped, irritation flaring until he saw who stood beyond the threshold. The general entered the OR without hesitation, his presence instantly changing the air. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the monitors seemed to hush. Halston straightened instinctively. "Sir, this is a sterile field." "So is a battlefield," the general replied evenly. "And I've stood in plenty." His eyes moved to the patient, then to the monitors. 42 systolic. Falling. "Who's in charge here?" the general asked. Halston hesitated just long enough to answer honestly. "I am." The general turned slightly. "Then explain to me why the surgeon who designed the protocol keeping my operators alive isn't at this table." Halston froze. "What?" he said. Evelyn stepped forward, scrubbing nurse already moving instinctively to block her, until the general raised a hand. "Let her through." Halston's mind raced. "Sir, with respect, I don't know what you think you know, but Dr. Carter is a vascular trauma specialist," the general finished. "With operational clearance and field experience you don't have." Silence crushed the room. Evelyn moved quickly, now hands already gloved, slipping into position beside the table. She didn't look at Halston. She didn't need to. "Clamp proximal," she said, voice steady. "Now." Halston bristled. "You can't just do it," the general said sharply. For the first time in years, Halston hesitated in his own oar. The anesthesiologist broke the silence. "BP's 35. That decided it." Halston nodded stiffly. "Clamp proximal." The instrument went in. Evelyn leaned in, eyes, sharp hands precise. "Suction here. No lower. Good. Now retract." Blood slowed. The monitor steadied just slightly. Pressures stabilizing, the anesthesiologist said, disbelief creeping into her voice. 48, 50. Evelyn didn't smile. She was already working. "Fragments there," she murmured. "I see it." She guided the clamp with surgical precision, isolating the tear, controlling the bleed without further damage. The field cleared. For the first time since the surgery began, there was room to breathe. Halston watched, stunned. Her movements were confident but economical. No wasted motion, no theatrics, just mastery. "How long have you known this technique?" he asked quietly, unable to stop himself. Evelyn didn't look up. Long enough to know when not to argue. Minutes passed. The bleeding was under control. The SEAL's vitals climbed steadily. BP's 70, the anesthesiologist said. Heart rate stabilizing. A collective exhale rippled through the room. The general watched silently, arms crossed, eyes never leaving Evelyn. When the critical phase passed, he turned to Halston. "You blocked her," he said flatly. Halston swallowed. "I made a judgment call." The general nodded once. "So did I." He turned back to Evelyn. "Doctor," he said, voice softer now from this moment on. The monitors beeped steadily alive. Outside, the OR staff pressed closer, sensing something monumental unfolding. The general's voice cut through the room like a final verdict. She's in charge now. Halston felt the words land like a blow, and for the first time in his career he had no argument left. The words, "she's in charge now," didn't echo. They settled. In operating room 3, no one moved for a heartbeat too long. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, indifferent to hierarchy, loyal only to life. The Navy SEAL on the table was alive for now, and every person in the room knew exactly why. Dr. Evelyn Carter didn't acknowledge the declaration. She simply adjusted her stance, leaned closer to the surgical field, and spoke with calm authority. "Let's proceed," she said. "We're not done yet." The spell broke. "Retractor," a nurse said quickly, already moving. "Suction steady," Evelyn added. "We need full visualization before we close." Halston stepped back half a pace, instinctively yielding space. The realization struck him with uncomfortable clarity. The room had reorganized itself around her without resistance. No debate, no confusion, just competence drawing gravity. He watched her hands. They moved with an economy he recognized but rarely saw, decisive, restrained, certain. She anticipated the next step before anyone else spoke. Instruments appeared when she needed them. Adjustments were made before problems formed. This wasn't improvisation. This was someone executing a plan she'd already run 100 times in her mind. BP's holding at 75, the anesthesiologist reported. Heart rate 1 to 10 and steady. "Good," Evelyn replied. "We'll repair the vessel first, then reassess for secondary damage." Halston frowned slightly. "You're prioritizing vascular repair before full exploration." "Yes, that's risky." Evelyn finally glanced at him. Not defensively, not challengingly, just directly. "So is bleeding out," she said. Halston nodded, once tight-lipped. "Understood." The general remained at the edge of the room, silent, watching everything. He noticed the shift immediately, not just in command, but in respect. Nurses leaned in rather than waiting to be told. The resident who had spoken up earlier now followed Evelyn's movements with intense focus, learning in real time. Outside the OR, the hallway buzzed with restrained chaos. Word spread fast in hospitals, and this was no exception. "She took over," someone whispered. From Halston, a general ordered it. "That's impossible." It happened. Administrators clustered nervously near the nurses' station, fielding calls they weren't authorized to answer. Military officers stood guard at the corridor entrances, now their presence unmistakable. Inside, the surgery continued. Evelyn guided the final sutures into place, reinforcing the repair with meticulous care. She checked the surrounding tissue, eyes narrowing slightly. "There's more," she said quietly. Halston leaned in. "We're secondary microtear," she replied. "Not catastrophic yet, but it will be if we close too soon." She adjusted the retractor by a fraction of an inch. Blood seeped into view. Halston felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't seen it. "Good catch," he admitted. Evelyn didn't respond. She was already correcting it. Minutes stretched. Sweat trickled down Halston's spine beneath his scrubs, though the room was cool. He found himself learning again, not from a textbook, not from a conference, but from watching someone who had been here before in places he had not. Finally, Evelyn stepped back. "Vitals?" she asked. "Stable," the anesthesiologist said, relief unmistakable. "BP 85. Heart rate 98. Evelyn nodded. "Begin closure." As the final sutures were placed and dressings applied, the tension that had gripped the room began to loosen. Not celebration, just quiet relief. The SEAL was alive. Evelyn removed her gloves slowly, methodically. Only then did she allow herself a breath. She turned to the general. "He'll make it through the night," she said. "ICU monitoring for the next 48 hours. No transport until he's fully stable." The general studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good work, Doctor." Halston cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may." The general turned to him. Halston hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I wasn't aware of Dr. Carter's background." "No," the general replied. "You weren't." Evelyn gathered her notes, eyes downcast, as if trying to make herself smaller. She had no interest in victory laps. The general addressed the room. This operation involved classified protocols. Dr. Carter's role in their development is not common knowledge. That does not make it less real. His gaze hardened slightly. Judging by appearances almost cost us a man. No one argued. Outside, the doors opened to reveal a small cluster of hospital leadership and military officials. Cameras were conspicuously absent, but the weight of scrutiny was heavy all the same. Halston followed Evelyn into the corridor. "Dr. Carter," he said. She stopped. "I owe you an apology," he continued, voice low. "I underestimated you." Evelyn met his eyes. There was no triumph there, just exhaustion. "Yes," she said simply. "You did." He flinched, not at the words, but at their truth. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. "About your experience, because it shouldn't matter," she replied. "The patient matters." She turned to leave, but the general's voice stopped her. "Dr. Carter." She turned back. "You were requested by name," he said. "By the unit." Evelyn's composure cracked just slightly. "They remembered," she said softly. "They remember everything," the general replied. A military aide approached. "Sir Command wants an update." "Tell them the operator is alive," the general said. "And tell them Dr. Carter is staying." Evelyn stiffened. "Staying," the general nodded. "This hospital will be receiving more cases like this. Effective immediately, you'll be overseeing the specialized trauma response." Halston's breath caught. Evelyn hesitated. "Sir, This isn't a promotion," the general interrupted. "It's a responsibility." She considered that, then nodded. "Understood." As she walked away toward the ICU, staff parted without realizing it. Not because of rank, because of respect. Behind her, Halston watched the weight of his own assumptions settling heavily on his shoulders. And somewhere down the hall, a Navy SEAL breathed alive because the right person had finally been allowed to lead. But outside the ICU doors, a pair of suited figures waited, eyes sharp, faces unreadable. The story, it seemed, wasn't finished yet. The ICU doors slid shut with a soft hiss, sealing Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reeves inside a cocoon of machines, wires, and quiet vigilance. The rhythm of the monitors steadied, no longer frantic, but still fragile, like a promise that could be broken if handled carelessly. "Doctor." Evelyn Carter stood just outside the glass, arms folded, eyes fixed on the steady rise and fall of his chest. Behind her, the corridor had changed. What had been a battlefield of egos only an hour earlier was now hushed, almost reverent. Nurses moved with softer steps. Residents whispered instead of spoke. Even the fluorescent lights seemed less harsh. Survival did that. It altered the temperature of a place. A nurse approached Evelyn with a tablet. "ICU admission complete. Labs are pending. Imaging will be ready in 10 minutes. Evelyn nodded. "Thank you. Let me know if his pressure dips below 70. "Yes, doctor." The word landed differently now. Across the corridor, doctor. Richard Halston stood alone near the scrub sinks, staring at his reflection in the stainless steel. His hands still trembled faintly, the adrenaline slow to drain. He replayed the surgery again and again. Every moment he'd dismissed Evelyn's warnings. Every second he'd clung to control instead of clarity. A hospital administrator joined him, voice tight. "The general wants a meeting. Now." Halston closed his eyes briefly. "About me, about the case," the administrator said carefully. "And the process." That was worse. Inside a small conference room, the general sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 officers in dress uniforms. A civilian in a dark suit, Pentagon liaison, stood near the wall, tablet in hand. Evelyn entered last. The general gestured for her to sit beside him. She did, posture straight, expression neutral. "This is a debrief," the general said. "Not a trial. But it will be honest." Halston took a seat across from Evelyn, avoiding her eyes. The liaison spoke first. "Chief Reeves was injured during an extraction involving experimental equipment. His survival has strategic implications." Evelyn remained silent. "You were requested specifically," the liaison continued. "Your protocols saved multiple operators in similar scenarios overseas." Halston looked up sharply. Overseas, Evelyn met his gaze. "Embedded deployments," she said. "Field hospitals, forward surgical teams." Halston's throat tightened. The general leaned forward. "Dr. Halston, your skills are not in question. But tonight authority nearly overruled expertise." Halston swallowed. "I followed standard procedure." "Yes," the general replied. "When the situation demanded something beyond standard." Silence settled. The liaison tapped his tablet. "Effective immediately. Street." Matthews will be designated a Tier 2 support facility for special operations trauma. Dr. Carter will oversee protocol integration and training. Halston stiffened. Sir, this is not optional, the liaison said evenly. Evelyn finally spoke. I didn't ask for this. The general turned to her. No, but they asked for you. She exhaled slowly. Then we do it right. Outside the room, news spread faster than any official memo. She's taking over the trauma response. Halston's not in charge anymore, he's still here. Just not alone. Some welcomed the change. Others bristled. Power never shifted quietly. Later that night, Evelyn returned to the ICU. Reeves lay still, sedated, his face pale but peaceful. She checked the monitors, reviewed the chart, adjusted a setting by a fraction. A young nurse watched her closely. You don't seem surprised by any of this. Evelyn paused. Surprised by what? By the general, by the authority, by being in charge. Evelyn considered the question. When you've watched people die because someone wouldn't listen, she said, you stop being surprised by resistance. You just prepare for it. Down the hall, two suited figures waited, the same ones from earlier. They exchanged a glance as Evelyn exited the ICU. Dr. Carter, one of them said, we need a word. She studied them calmly. If this is about credit, I'm not interested. It's not, the other replied. It's about accountability. They led her to a quiet alcove. There will be an internal review, the first man said. Not of you. Of the system. Evelyn nodded. Good. You'll be asked to testify. I will. And Dr. Halston, Evelyn's eyes hardened not with anger but with resolve. He made a mistake. So did the system that rewarded it. Fix the system. The men nodded, impressed despite themselves. As dawn crept through the hospital windows, Evelyn finally allowed herself to sit. Exhaustion weighed heavy, but sleep refused to come. She thought of the operators she'd treated in dust-filled tents, of nights where help never arrived, of decisions made without applause or witnesses. This time had been different. This time the silence had been broken. Across the hospital, Halston stood in his office staring at the credentialing files spread across his desk. He'd begun really reading Evelyn's history. The publications, the deployments, the recommendations he'd never bothered to check. Regret settled deep in his chest. Back in the ICU, a monitor beeped softly as Daniel Reeves's blood pressure ticked upward. Stable, alive, and outside the glass doctor, Evelyn Carter stood watch. Not as a symbol, not as a headline, but as exactly what she had always been. The right doctor, at the right moment. But the ripples of that moment were only beginning to spread. Morning light filtered through the narrow ICU windows, pale and cautious, as if even the sun wasn't sure it was welcome yet. The night's chaos had receded, but its echoes lingered in every hallway. Doctor, Evelyn Carter stood at the nurse's station reviewing updates when the double doors at the far end of the unit opened again. This time the footsteps were unmistakable. Boots, polished, measured. Conversations died instantly. Two uniformed officers entered first, scanning the area with practiced precision. Behind them walked the general, his presence unchanged, commanding without effort. But there was something different now. Purpose sharpened into resolve. Evelyn straightened instinctively. Doctor, the general said, approaching. We need to talk. Now. She nodded once and followed him into a quiet consultation room overlooking the ICU. The glass walls offered a clear view of Daniel Reeves's bed, his chest rising steadily beneath the blanket. The general didn't sit. Neither did she. You saved his life, he said plainly. Evelyn met his eyes. A team did. A team that nearly failed him, the general corrected. Until you were allowed to do your job. She said nothing. The general folded his hands behind his back. I've been in this uniform for 34 years. I've buried people because someone higher up ignored the one voice that mattered. I don't intend to repeat that mistake. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Sir, with respect, I'm not here to make a statement. No, he agreed. You're here to make decisions. He stepped closer to the glass. More helicopters are inbound. 2 hours out. Another operator injured in the same operation. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Similar trauma, worse, the general replied. And command wants to know who's running the surgical response. She didn't hesitate. I am. The general nodded as if he'd expected no other answer. Good. Across the ICU, word spread fast. Another incoming SEAL. Same operation. Same risks. Doctor. Halston heard it from a resident rushing past his office. He stepped into the hallway just as an announcement echoed overhead, alerting trauma staff to prepare. He hesitated. Then, for the first time in his career, he did something unexpected. He went to find Evelyn. She was already scrubbing in when he arrived outside the OR prep area. He stopped short, watching her through the glass. There was no hesitation in her movements, no nerves, just readiness. "Dr. Carter," he said when she emerged. She turned. "Dr. Halston." A pause stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken. "I want to help," he said finally, "if you'll have me." Evelyn studied him not as a rival, not as a subordinate, but as a surgeon, as a human being capable of learning. "You can assist," she said, "but you follow my lead." He nodded immediately. Understood. Above them, the distant thrum of helicopter blades grew louder. The second Black Hawk landed hard on the helipad, its urgency unmistakable. Medics rushed out, shouting vitals, hands slick with blood. The new patient was younger than Reeves, barely 30. Multiple thoracic injuries, collapsed lung, suspected arterial rupture. "Or two," someone yelled. Evelyn moved fast, issuing commands with quiet authority. "Prep for massive transfusion. Call cardiothoracic. I want imaging on standby, but we're not waiting for it." Halston followed her lead without question, relaying orders, coordinating staff. The shift was visible to everyone watching. Inside OR2, the atmosphere mirrored the night before, but this time there was no confusion about who was in charge. The surgery began with controlled intensity. Evelyn worked the field eye's sharp mind, calculating trajectories and probabilities. Halston anticipated her needs, now handing instruments before she asked, adjusting angles instinctively. "BP's unstable," the anesthesiologist warned. "We're losing ground." "Hold steady," Evelyn said. "We're almost there." Then the doors burst open. The room froze. Another uniform entered, this one different. Darker, heavier. The insignia on his chest spoke of a rank that outranked even the general. A 4-star. The general stepped aside respectfully. "Sir." The 4-star's gaze swept the room, landing on the open chest cavity, the bleeding, the tension. "Who's running this?" he asked. Before anyone else could speak, the general answered. "She is." The 4-star looked at Evelyn. Really looked at her. For a heartbeat, the entire hospital seemed to hold its breath. "Doctor," he said slowly, "this man is critical to an ongoing operation. Failure is not an option." Evelyn didn't flinch. "Then stop talking and let me work." A few gasps rippled through the room. The 4-star studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Proceed." The surgery intensified. Blood loss was severe. Time compressed into sharp, decisive moments. Evelyn adjusted the approach mid-procedure, rerouting access, making a call that went against standard teaching but not against reality. "Trust me," she said once quietly, to no one in particular. Halston trusted her. Minutes later, the bleeding slowed, then stopped. Vitals stabilized. A collective exhale filled the room. The 4-star stepped forward. "Dr. Carter," he said, voice carrying authority and something else, respect. "You've just altered the outcome of an entire mission." Evelyn removed her gloves, hands steady despite the fatigue creeping in. "I did my job." The 4-star nodded. "And in doing so, you exposed a weakness in our assumptions." He turned to the assembled staff. "This hospital will change because of tonight." His gaze hardened. "Anyone who stands in the way of competence again will answer directly to me." Silence followed, thick, absolute. Outside, the OR administrators exchanged nervous glances. Careers trembled on invisible lines. As the 4-star and general exited, Halston looked at Evelyn. "You didn't just save lives tonight," he said quietly. "You changed how power works in this building." Evelyn wiped her hands, exhaustion finally showing in her eyes. Power was never the point. Down the hall, alarms chimed softly, stable, alive. But beyond the hospital walls, the consequences of what had happened were already moving fast. Investigations, reassignments, decisions that couldn't be undone. And somewhere high above the city, another helicopter changed course, heading straight for Street Matthews. The hospital had never felt so small. Street Matthews Regional Medical Center sat on nearly 30 acres. a concrete sprawl of corridors, wings, and hidden stairwells. But in that moment, every hallway seemed to funnel toward one truth that could no longer be contained. Dr. Evelyn Carter was no longer invisible. She felt it the moment she stepped out of OR2. Conversations stopped when she passed. Not abruptly, no one wanted to be obvious, but enough that the silence followed her like a shadow. Nurses who had once looked past her now met her eyes. Residents straightened instinctively. Even administrators, usually insulated by titles and offices, paused mid-step as she walked by. Respect had weight, and tonight it was heavy. Evelyn washed her hands slowly at the scrub sink, watching the diluted blood swirl down the drain. Her shoulders ached. Her lower back throbbed with the familiar pain of hours bent over an operating table. But the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the mental toll. She had crossed a line, not of protocol, but of exposure. Behind her, Dr. Richard Holston stood quietly, arms folded, gaze fixed on the floor. He had assisted in the second surgery without hesitation, without ego. But now that the adrenaline was fading, something else had taken its place. Awareness. "I didn't know," he said finally. Evelyn dried her hands, then turned to face him. "You didn't ask." Holston winced. "I should have." "Yes," she agreed. "You should have." The words weren't cruel. They were factual. That somehow made them worse. Before Holston could respond, the general approached, flanked by 2 officers and the Pentagon liaison. Their expressions were unreadable, professional, controlled, but the energy around them was unmistakable. "Dr. Carter," the general said, "we need to formalize what's already happened." Evelyn nodded once. "I figured." They moved into a secured conference room. The door closed. The sound echoed louder than it should have. The liaison activated a privacy screen. "What's discussed here doesn't leave this room without authorization." Evelyn leaned back slightly. "Then let's be precise." The general studied her for a moment. "You've been operating under partial disclosure. That ends now." He gestured to the liaison, who tapped the tablet and projected a series of documents onto the screen. Classified designations, redacted sections, familiar acronyms. Holston's eyes widened as he took it in. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the liaison said, is not just a civilian trauma surgeon. She is the principal architect behind the Adaptive Vascular Control Protocol, currently used by multiple special operations units. Holston's breath caught. That protocol was developed overseas. "Yes," Evelyn said quietly. "In places where backup doesn't exist." The liaison continued. "She was embedded with forward surgical teams for 6 years. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, classified locations we don't list." Holston stared at her. "You were there, I was," she replied. "Because someone had to be." The general folded his arms. "You saved over 30 operators using those techniques. Tonight's patients are alive because of methods you designed under fire." The room went silent. Holston finally understood what he had been standing in the way of. "This hospital credentialed you as a general trauma surgeon," the liaison said. "At your request." Evelyn nodded. "I wanted to practice medicine without rank attached." "And tonight," the general asked. "Tonight," Evelyn said, "rank found me anyway." A knock interrupted them. The door opened slightly, and a nurse peeked in, eyes wide. "Sir, ICU update." The general nodded. "Go on." "Chief Reeves is responsive," she said. Briefly. He asked for Dr. Carter by name. Something tightened in Evelyn's chest. "I'll be right there," she said. The nurse nodded and withdrew. The general watched her carefully. "They trust you. That kind of trust isn't given lightly." "It's earned," Evelyn replied. "Usually when no one else is willing to stand in the room." The liaison cleared his throat. "There's another matter. Doctor, Holston's actions earlier tonight, blocking access, delaying specialized intervention, will trigger an internal review." Holston stiffened. "I did what I thought was right." "No," Evelyn said calmly. "You did what protected your authority." The words landed hard. Holston opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he didn't argue. The general nodded once. "This isn't about punishment. It's about correction." He turned to Evelyn. "Effective immediately, you are the medical authority for all special operations trauma cases routed through this facility. No exceptions." Evelyn held his gaze. "Then I need full autonomy." "You'll have it." And no interference, she added. The general's expression hardened. Anyone who interferes will answer to me. Outside the room, the hospital felt like it was holding its breath. When Evelyn entered the ICU, the atmosphere shifted again. Nurses made space without being asked. A respiratory therapist adjusted equipment preemptively. Daniel Reeves lay propped slightly, eyes half open, breathing shallow but steady. His gaze focused slowly until it found her. "There you are," he murmured. Evelyn stepped closer. "You're not allowed to talk yet." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "Figures." He swallowed, then whispered, "They tried to keep you out." "They tried," she said. "But you came anyway." "Yes." His eyes closed briefly. "Knew you would." She rested a hand lightly on the rail of the bed. "Get some rest. You did your part." As she turned to leave, a young resident approached her, voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Carter, is it true?" "About the deployments," Evelyn paused. "It's true that medicine doesn't care where you practice it," she said. "Only whether you're willing to do what's necessary." The resident nodded, awed. Down the hall, Holston watched the interaction. The hospital he thought he knew had changed overnight. Not because of a policy, not because of a memo, because the truth had surfaced, and once seen it couldn't be ignored. As Evelyn disappeared into the corridor, the general spoke quietly to the liaison. "She didn't seek power," he said. "No," the liaison agreed. "That's why she should have it." Outside dawn fully broke over the city. Inside Street, Matthews, the balance of authority had shifted irreversibly, and for those who had built walls instead of listening, the reckoning was just beginning. The reckoning did not arrive with shouting. It arrived with paperwork, silence, and eyes that no longer looked away. By mid-morning, Street Matthews felt like a different hospital. Not quieter, just sharper. Conversations happened behind closed doors. Phones rang and were answered with clipped, careful voices. Administrators who once moved with unquestioned authority now paused before speaking, measuring every word. Dr. Evelyn Carter noticed it all without reacting. She stood in the ICU reviewing imaging when Dr. Richard Holston approached, holding a thin folder in his hands. His posture was rigid, his confidence stripped down to something rawer and more honest. "They've initiated the review," he said. Evelyn didn't look up. "I expected that. They want my statement," he continued. "About why I blocked you." Now she looked at him, and she asked. Halston swallowed. "I told the truth." That got her attention. "I said I made assumptions," he went on. "About your age, your credentials, your place in the hierarchy. I said those assumptions nearly killed a patient." Silence stretched between them. "That couldn't have been easy," Evelyn said finally. "No," Halston replied. "But it was necessary." He hesitated. "They're recommending suspension of my trauma leadership role. Temporary, pending retraining and oversight." Evelyn studied his face not for satisfaction but for sincerity. "Do you understand why?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Because I confused control with competence." She nodded once. "Then learn from it." Before he could respond, alarms chimed softly from Daniel Reeves's room. Not emergency alarms, assessment alerts. Evelyn turned instantly, already moving. Reeves was more awake now, eyes clearer, breath steadier. A nurse adjusted his oxygen as Evelyn stepped in. "Vitals?" she asked. "Stable," the nurse replied. "But he's asking questions." Evelyn approached the bed. "That's your cue to rest," she said gently. Reeves cracked a weak smile. "They told me what happened." She raised an eyebrow. "Hospital gossip travels fast." "They said a general," yelled Reeves murmured. "Said you were in charge." Evelyn exhaled slowly. He was emphatic. Reeves' expression turned serious. "They tried to block you. Again." Her jaw tightened. "Not anymore." "Good," he said. "Because next time I might not have time to wait." Those words followed her as she left the ICU. In a secured administrative wing, a formal meeting was already underway. The general sat at the head of the table. The four-star general joined remotely, his image projected onto the wall. Hospital executives filled the remaining seats, their usual confidence replaced by careful restraint. "This facility failed last night," the four-star said without preamble. No one spoke. "Not medically," he continued. "But structurally, authority impeded expertise. Ego obstructed survival." His gaze swept the room through the screen. "That will not happen again." The general stood. Effective immediately, Doctor. Evelyn Carter is the final authority on all special operations trauma cases routed through this hospital. A murmur rippled through the executives. One cleared his throat. Sir, with respect, our bylaws are irrelevant, the 4-star interrupted. When lives and missions are at stake. Silence followed. She answers directly to me, the 4-star added, and to command. Any attempt to override, delay, or undermine her decisions will be treated as obstruction. The words landed like a verdict. Later that afternoon, a pressurized silence followed Evelyn as she walked into the main trauma conference room. Physicians, nurses, residents all waiting. Some curious, some defensive, some quietly relieved. She stood at the front without theatrics. This isn't about me, she began. It's about outcomes. No one interrupted. When you treat special operations trauma, she continued, you're not just treating a body. You're treating variables most textbooks don't cover, injury patterns that don't behave, time constraints that don't forgive hesitation. She paused, letting that sink in. If you don't know something, she said, you ask. If someone challenges you, you listen. Rank will not save a patient. Skill might. Eyes dropped. Heads nodded. At the back of the room, Halston listened in silence. A resident raised a tentative hand. Dr. Carter. What if command pressure conflicts with medical judgment? Evelyn met his gaze. Then medical judgment wins. Every time. The room felt lighter after that. By evening, the final reports came in. Both SEALs were stable. No further internal bleeding. No neurological deficits detected. 2 lives saved. 2 outcomes rewritten. The general found Evelyn standing alone near the helipad as the sun dipped below the horizon. The city stretched out beneath them, unaware of how close it had come to tragedy. You did more than save operators today, he said. You reset a culture. Evelyn didn't turn. Culture resists change. Yes, he agreed. But it remembers moments like this. He studied her. You could have taken credit. You didn't. I didn't need it, she replied. The general nodded. That's why they listen to you. Below them, a helicopter lifted off rotors, beating steadily against the fading light. Inside the hospital, decisions were already being rewritten, protocols amended, chains of command adjusted. Justice, when it came, wasn't loud. It was precise. And as night settled once more over Street Matthews, one truth had become unavoidable. The doors that once blocked Dr. Evelyn Carter would never close against her again. Night returned to Street Matthews quietly, as if unwilling to disturb what had finally been set right. The hospital lights dimmed in stages, corridors settling into their nocturnal rhythm. But for Dr. Evelyn Carter, the work was far from over. She stood at the central nurse's station, sleeves rolled, reviewing updated scans on a wall monitor. The images glowed, pale blue arteries repaired, bleeding halted, margins clean. Success by every measurable standard. Yet Evelyn's mind stayed alert, trained by years where victory was never assumed until daylight came twice. ICUs stable across the board, a charge nurse reported. Both operators holding steady. Evelyn nodded. Good. Increase neurochecks overnight. I don't want surprises at 0300, already scheduled. Dr. Richard Halston approached slowly, no longer carrying files, no longer posturing, just a surgeon tired and reflective. They reassigned my trauma rotation, he said quietly. Effective immediately. Evelyn didn't look up. Temporary. 6 months, he replied. Supervised return after. She finally met his eyes. That's fair, he exhaled. I thought I'd be angry. And you're not, I'm clear, he said. About what matters. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 doctors bound by the same calling, separated only by how long it had taken to listen. A commotion rose near the elevators. Security moved first, then administrators. The general appeared again, expression unreadable. Dr. Carter, he said. We have a complication. Evelyn was already moving. Which patient? Neither, the general replied. This one's institutional. They entered a smaller administrative office. Inside, 2 hospital executives sat stiff-backed legal counsel beside them. The tension was thick enough to taste. One of your department heads filed a formal complaint, the general said evenly, alleging unauthorized military interference in hospital operations. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? On the grounds that civilian medicine should not answer to military command, the lawyer replied carefully. Evelyn considered that. They're right. The room stilled. Civilian medicine, shouldn't she? Continued. But emergency trauma answers to physics, not politics. Blood loss doesn't care who signs the bylaws. The general nodded faintly. The lawyer tried again. Doctor, with respect, your authority was granted verbally under extreme circumstances. Evelyn leaned forward, then put it in writing. The executives shifted uncomfortably. I'm not here to dominate this hospital, Evelyn said. I'm here to ensure no one dies because someone else felt threatened. Silence followed. The general broke it. The authorization will be formalized. Federal backing. Military medical joint oversight. He looked at the executives. You can adapt, or step aside. No one argued. When they exited the office, Evelyn felt the weight finally begin to lift, not because the fight was over, but because the direction was clear. She returned to the ICU one last time before dawn. Daniel Reeves slept peacefully, now ventilator removed, breathing on his own. The younger SEAL in the adjacent room stirred vital signs strong. Evelyn stood between the two rooms, hands resting lightly on the glass. A nurse joined her. You know, people are talking. Evelyn smiled faintly. They always do. They're saying you changed how this place works. Evelyn shook her head. No. I reminded it why it exists. The nurse hesitated. What will you do now? Evelyn looked back at the rooms. Tomorrow train, teach, prepare. And after that, she paused. Be ready when the doors open again. As dawn broke for the second time since the helicopters arrived, Street, Matthews felt steadier, aligned in a way it hadn't been before. Systems adjusted, roles clarified, pride humbled. In a quiet office overlooking the city, the general made one last call to command. Yes, he said. She's exactly who we thought. He hung up and allowed himself a rare smile. Down the hall, Dr. Evelyn Carter walked toward the exit. Scrub's creased eyes, tired but focused. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The hospital knew who she was now. Morning rounds began without ceremony. No announcements, no cameras, just the steady cadence of footsteps and quiet voices moving from room to room. That was how real change settled in, without applause, but with permanence. Dr. Evelyn Carter led the ICU team, tablet in hand, eyes scanning vitals with practiced ease. Daniel Reeves was awake now, propped slightly, color returning to his face. He watched her approach with a familiarity born not of friendship, but of trust, earned the hard way. Morning, she said. Didn't think I'd see another, Reeves replied, voice rough but steady. You've disappointed worse odds, Evelyn said. Don't stop now. She reviewed his chart, adjusted a medication, then met his gaze. You'll be moved out of ICU tonight if you keep improving. He nodded, then hesitated. They told me about Halston. Evelyn didn't react. What did they tell you? That he tried to block you? That he admitted it? She considered her words. He made a mistake. He owned it. Reeves' expression tightened. In my world, that matters. Across the hall, the younger SEAL was sitting up for the first time, joking weakly with a nurse. The crisis phase had passed. Now came the long arc of recovery and accountability. By noon, the hospital's internal review panel convened. Dr. Richard Halston sat alone at the long table, hands folded, eyes forward. Across from him were administrators, medical board members, and an external reviewer appointed jointly by the hospital and federal oversight. Evelyn was present, but not as an accuser. She sat to the side, arms relaxed, posture neutral. Dr. Halston, the panel chair began. You've acknowledged obstructing a critical specialist from accessing a high-risk surgery. Do you understand the severity of that action? Yes, Halston said plainly. Do you dispute the findings? No. Do you accept responsibility? Yes. A pause followed. Why, the chair asked. Why did you block her? Halston exhaled slowly. Because I thought authority was the same as readiness. Because I believed experience only counted if it looked familiar. And because I was wrong. The room remained silent. Evelyn watched him, not with vindication, but with something quieter. Closure. The chair nodded. Your suspension stands. You'll undergo retraining under Dr. Carter's oversight should you return to trauma leadership. Halston glanced at Evelyn, then nodded. I'll earn it. After the meeting, Halston found Evelyn in the hallway. I meant what I said, he told her. If you'll allow it, I want to learn from you. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. Learning requires humility. I have plenty now, he replied. She nodded once. Then we'll start there. By late afternoon, word reached the staff. New protocols were live. Joint trauma authority. Clear escalation paths. No single ego could bottleneck a life again. The general returned one final time, this time without escort. He found Evelyn in a small classroom converting into a training space. You're not resting, he observed. Rest comes later, she said. Preparation doesn't. He watched her for a moment. Command approved the expansion. This becomes a regional node. She absorbed that. Then we'll need more people. You'll get them. And autonomy, she added. He smiled faintly. You've earned it. As evening fell, the hospital began to exhale. Staff who had carried tension for years felt something loosen. Not fear, but expectation. Evelyn walked the ICU one last time. Daniel Reeves was asleep again, breathing evenly. The younger SEAL waved weakly from his bed. Outside, the city lights flickered on, unaware of how close 2 lives had come to being extinguished by pride. Evelyn stepped onto the helipad briefly, letting the cool air clear her thoughts. The wind carried the distant sounds of traffic of ordinary life continuing. She thought of the doors that had closed in her face, and of the voice that had opened them. Inside, a hospital changed course, and at its center stood a doctor who never asked for power, only the chance to do what was right. The last helicopter lifted off just after sunset. Its rotors thudded rhythmically against the darkening sky as it disappeared beyond the city skyline, carrying paperwork, observers, and the final echoes of a crisis that had nearly broken street. Matthews, but instead had remade it. Inside the hospital, normalcy returned in fragments. Visitors filled waiting rooms again. Phones rang with routine questions. Coffee machines hummed, yet beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. The building still stood on the same concrete and steel, but the way decisions were made inside it had changed forever. Doctor. Evelyn Carter walked the main corridor alone, her steps unhurried for the first time in 2 days. Her scrubs were freshly changed, but the fatigue remained etched into her posture and the faint shadows under her eyes. She didn't mind. Fatigue meant the work had mattered. She paused outside a glass-walled conference room. Inside, Dr. Richard Halston stood at the whiteboard erasing outdated flowcharts and replacing them with new ones, cleaner, clearer. No names at the top, no rigid chains, just decision trees that pointed always toward the patient. He noticed her through the glass and stepped out. I rewrote the intake escalation, he said, based on what you taught us. Evelyn glanced at the board. You removed the bottlenecks. Yes. And the ego. He gave a small, self-aware smile. Working on that. She nodded. That's all anyone can do. Down the hall, a group of residents clustered around a table reviewing surgical footage from the night before. Evelyn heard her name mentioned, not in awe, not in gossip, but in reference. She recognized the pattern before imaging. She didn't argue. She just acted. She listened. That, she thought, mattered more than reputation. Her phone vibrated softly. A secure message. Chief Reeves cleared for transport in 48 hours. Prognosis excellent. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight of that sentence settle. Alive. Going home. Mission intact. She continued toward the ICU one last time. Daniel Reeves was awake again, sitting upright now, color strong in his face. He looked more like the operator he'd been than the patient he'd become. You came back, he said. I always do, she replied. He studied her for a moment. They told me what's happening here, and they said you're in charge now. Evelyn leaned against the wall. I'm responsible now. He nodded. That's the difference. He hesitated, then spoke more quietly. Out there, when things go wrong, we trust the quiet ones, the ones who don't need to be seen. Evelyn met his eyes. That's because loud people panic. A faint smile crossed his face. If I ever end up on another table, I hope it's yours. She allowed herself a small, rare smile. Try not to make a habit of it. As she left the ICU, she passed the spot where she had once been stopped, where a red light had barred her from the operating room. The indicator was gone, now replaced by a new access panel with expanded clearance. The door slid open at her approach. No resistance, no hesitation. In the administrative wing, final documents were being signed. Oversight boards approved. Protocols ratified. Careers redirected, some elevated, some humbled. Justice, it turned out, didn't require destruction. Only truth. Later that night, the general stood alone in his office, city lights reflected in the glass. He reviewed the after-action report one final time before signing it. At the bottom, beneath lines of commendation and procedural changes, one sentence stood out. Critical outcome reversed due to timely intervention by Dr. Evelyn Carter. He set the pen down and exhaled. Across the city, Evelyn stepped out of the hospital into the cool night air. She didn't look back at the building. She never did. For her places were temporary. Principles were not. She walked to her car, the city humming around her, unaware that somewhere inside that hospital, a culture had been forced to confront itself and had chosen at last to listen, because one voice, when finally heard, had been enough. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits quiet, patient until the moment demands it. Dr. Evelyn Carter wasn't denied entry because she lacked skill. She was denied because others confused authority with worth, seniority with truth, and when that belief nearly cost a life, reality intervened. The lesson is simple but not easy. Listen before you lead. Question before you command. And never mistake silence for weakness. In moments that matter most, the right person is often the one no one bothered to ask. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? And if you believe stories about courage, humility, and justice deserve to be told, subscribe so you won't miss the next one.